The Witch's Curse. In the heart of the remote village of Eldenwood, a shadow of dread loomed. Nestled deep within the forest, Eldenwood had long been isolated from the outside world, its villagers bound by old traditions and whispered legends. One such legend was the tale of a witch who had once cursed the land. The villagers had almost forgotten her, believing her powers to be nothing more than superstition. That was until the day they dared to provoke her wrath. The old witch, known only as Mother Isolde, had lived in the forest for as long as anyone could remember. Her home was a ramshackle hut surrounded by gnarled trees and thick underbrush. Those who ventured too close spoke of a chilling aura that seemed to emanate from the very air around her dwelling. Few had seen her, and fewer still had spoken of her, but all knew better than to cross her path. One fateful winter, a young man named Thomas, brash and foolish, dared to mock the old witch. Thomas had been among those who considered the tales of Mother Isolde to be nothing more than the ravings of old women. Drunk with youthful arrogance, he and his friends ventured to the edge of the forest, where they found the witch's hut. From a distance they hurled insults and threats, their voices echoing through the cold, quiet night. Little did they know that their taunts would awaken something far darker than their mockery. The wind howled as if in response, carrying their scornful words through the forest. The next morning, the villagers awoke to a scene of eerie silence. Thomas and his friends were nowhere to be found. Their homes were abandoned, their possessions left in disarray. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some claimed that the witch had taken them, while others whispered of a curse that had befallen the village. Elders spoke of omens: a raven perched on a dead tree, the sudden withering of crops, and a cold that seemed to seep into the very bones of the villagers. As the days passed, the villagers began to notice strange occurrences. The once peaceful nights were now punctuated by unsettling noises, creaking floors, whispering winds, and disembodied footsteps. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and a sense of unease hung heavy in the air. The villagers, normally skeptical, could no longer ignore the growing fear that gripped their community. Desperation led them to seek out the village's wise woman, an old crone named Agnes. Agnes was known for her knowledge of ancient lore and remedies, and the villagers hoped she might provide some answers. As she gathered her herbs and candles, she muttered ancient incantations, trying to uncover the cause of the strange happenings. Her search led her to a chilling revelation: Mother Isolde's curse had indeed been awakened. According to Agnes, the witch had placed a powerful curse on Eldenwood long ago, a curse that was said to bring misfortune and despair to those who crossed her. The curse was tied to the very land, and once unleashed, it would take more than simple words to quell it. In a state of panic, the villagers tried to make amends. They offered apologies and left tokens of goodwill at the edge of the forest, hoping to appease the vengeful spirit of the witch. But it was too late. The witch's anger had been stirred, and the curse was now set in motion. As the days turned into weeks, the effects of the curse became more pronounced. The once fertile land began to wither, and the once lively village became a place of desolation. Animals disappeared, crops failed, and the once friendly villagers turned on each other in their desperation. The community that had once thrived in harmony was now a shadow of its former self, consumed by fear and sorrow. The curse had taken hold, and its grip was tightening with every passing day. The village of Eldenwood was no longer a place of hope, but a haunting reminder of the consequences of defying forces beyond their understanding. Little did they know, the true horror of the witch's curse was only beginning to unfold. As winter turned to spring, the curse's grip on Eldenwood grew more severe. The villagers, once proud and resilient, were now shadows of their former selves. Hunger and despair had become their constant companions. The land, once rich and fertile, remained barren and unyielding. Every attempt to cultivate the soil ended in failure, and the few remaining animals seemed to sicken and die as soon as they were brought near the fields. In the midst of this suffering, the villagers became increasingly paranoid and suspicious. They began to suspect one another of harboring ill intentions or of being secretly in league with the witch. Friendships were strained, and old grudges flared up into open conflict. The once close-knit community fractured, with accusations and mistrust fueling an atmosphere of fear. Agnes, the village-wise woman, was not immune to the curse's effects. Her once vibrant spirit was now overshadowed by the weight of the curse. She spent her days in solitude delving deeper into ancient texts and forgotten rituals in a desperate bid to find a solution. Her nights were haunted by visions of the witch mother Isolde's gaunt, ghostly figure appearing in her dreams, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. One evening, as Agnes studied an old tome by candlelight, she came across a passage that described a possible way to lift the curse. The ritual was intricate and required a rare and powerful artifact known as the Heartstone. The Heartstone was said to possess the ability to counteract dark magic and restore balance. However, finding the Heartstone was no easy task. It was rumored to be hidden in a place of great danger and guarded by ancient and malevolent forces. Determined to save her village, Agnes set out on a perilous journey to locate the Heartstone. The path was fraught with peril, dark, twisting forests, treacherous swamps, and ominous, shadowy figures that seemed to watch her every move. Yet the thought of the villagers' suffering spurred her on. With every step, she felt the weight of their hopes and fears pressing down on her. Back in Eldenwood, the villagers' plight grew more desperate. A series of tragic events began to unfold, children falling ill with strange and mysterious ailments, livestock perishing under bizarre circumstances, and unexplained accidents claiming lives. Whispers of a terrible fate began to circulate, and the once hopeful villagers were now on the brink of complete despair. In the midst of this chaos, a young woman named Eliza took it upon herself to try and ease the suffering of her fellow villagers. She ventured into the forest to gather herbs and seek out any form of aid she could find. Despite her fear and the eerie silence of the forest, Eliza remained determined, driven by a deep sense of duty and compassion. One day, while searching for medicinal plants, Eliza stumbled upon a hidden grove. At its center lay an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and ivy. The grove seemed oddly serene, in stark contrast to the turmoil she had experienced. As she approached the altar, she noticed strange markings etched into the stone, markings that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. Unbeknownst to Eliza, this grove was connected to the Heartstone's resting place. The markings on the altar were part of an ancient map that, when deciphered, could lead to the artifact's location. However, the full meaning of the markings was not immediately clear to her, and she had no way of knowing if they were a clue or a trap. Meanwhile, Agnes's journey continued, each day bringing new challenges and dangers. She faced twisted creatures born from the darkness of the curse, and her resolve was tested repeatedly. Yet the vision of Eldenwood in its time of need kept her moving forward. Her hope was that if she could find the Heartstone and perform the ritual, she might reverse the curse and bring peace to her troubled village. The tension in Eldenwood reached a breaking point. The villagers, desperate and angry, began to question their fate and the possibility of ever escaping the curse. Some even turned to dark rituals of their own, hoping to bargain for relief. As the village teetered on the brink of collapse, the struggle for survival became a fight not only against the curse but against the darkness within themselves. In this dire situation, the village's future hinged on the actions of two brave individuals: Agnes, on her treacherous quest for the Heartstone, and Eliza, who had unknowingly uncovered a crucial piece of the puzzle. The curse had unleashed its full fury, but hope still lingered in the shadow of their determination. Agnes's journey led her through the depths of the forest, where the very air seemed thick with foreboding. The path was barely visible, obscured by the undergrowth and the twisted branches of ancient trees. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig felt like a threat, as though the forest itself was alive and watching her every move. Her nights were spent in uneasy slumber, haunted by dreams of Mother Isolde. The witch's visage appeared with increasing frequency, her eyes filled with an eerie, unearthly glow. Each dream was a cryptic message, a blend of warnings and taunts that left Agnes with a sense of dread and uncertainty. Despite the fear that gripped her, Agnes pressed on, driven by the hope that she might save Eldenwood. One day, as she navigated a particularly dense part of the forest, Agnes came across an old, overgrown path. It was marked by ancient symbols, nearly worn away by time, but still recognizable. The symbols matched those she had seen in the old tome, hinting that she was on the right track. With renewed determination, she followed the path, which seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the forest. The deeper she ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees grew taller and more twisted, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the light. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over the land, broken only by the occasional distant cry of an unseen creature. Meanwhile, Eliza's discovery of the ancient stone altar in the hidden grove had not gone unnoticed. The markings on the altar were indeed a part of the map to the Heartstone's resting place. As she carefully examined the symbols, she realized that they seemed to form a series of coordinates or directions, leading to various locations within the forest. Eliza decided to follow these directions, hoping that they might lead her to something that could help her village. She set out early the next morning, her heart heavy with the weight of her responsibility. Each step through the forest seemed to draw her closer to the unknown, and the once familiar landscape now felt alien and menacing. As Eliza navigated the treacherous terrain, she began to notice that the forest seemed to react to her presence. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, and the whispering of the wind carried with it a sense of malevolence. Despite these unsettling signs, Eliza pressed on, driven by her unwavering resolve to help her people. Back in Eldenwood, the village's situation grew increasingly dire. The once hopeful villagers now lived in constant fear, their minds consumed by the curse's relentless grip. They began to isolate themselves, avoiding contact with one another and retreating into their homes as night fell. The village, once vibrant and alive, had become a ghostly shell of its former self. The few who dared to venture outside after dark reported seeing strange, shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. Some claimed to hear eerie whispers carried by the wind, while others spoke of a cold presence that seemed to follow them wherever they went. The curse's influence was now evident in every aspect of their lives, and the villagers were on the verge of giving in to their despair. Agnes, too, was feeling the curse's effects as she drew nearer to her goal. The obstacles in her path grew more daunting, with hidden traps and malevolent creatures appearing seemingly out of nowhere. Yet, her resolve remained unshaken. She knew that the Heartstone was the key to breaking the curse, and she could not afford to fail. As the days wore on, the village's hopes began to rest on the fragile hope that Agnes would succeed in her quest. The villagers clung to the belief that if she could retrieve the Heartstone and perform the ritual, they might be able to escape the curse's devastating effects. Their only solace was the knowledge that one of their own was fighting against the darkness on their behalf. In the forest, Eliza's journey brought her to a clearing where an old, crumbling structure stood. The building, partially covered in vines and moss, seemed to exude a sense of ancient power. It matched one of the locations indicated by the markings on the altar. As she approached, she felt a chill run down her spine, a sense that she was about to uncover something both extraordinary and terrifying. The structure appeared to be an old shrine, its walls adorned with faded symbols and inscriptions. Eliza carefully examined the markings, hoping they might offer further guidance. As she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows in the clearing seemed to dance and shift, and the forest around her grew eerily silent. Unbeknownst to Eliza, the shrine was a crucial part of the Heartstone's location. It was a place where the boundaries between the natural world and the supernatural were thin. The curse's influence was strong here, and the forces that guarded the Heartstone were not pleased with her intrusion. As she continued her search, the sense of foreboding grew stronger, and the danger of her quest became ever more apparent. Eliza's exploration of the ancient shrine proved both unsettling and fascinating. The walls of the shrine were covered in intricate carvings depicting scenes of long-forgotten rituals and battles between mythical beings. At the center of the shrine stood an altar, its surface inscribed with symbols that matched those Eliza had seen on the stone marker in the hidden grove. As she approached the altar, Eliza noticed a faint glow emanating from beneath a loose stone at its base. With trembling hands, she pried the stone free, revealing a small, ornate box. The box was covered in intricate patterns and appeared to be made of a dark, polished metal. It was clear that it held something of great significance. Her heart raced as she carefully opened the box. Inside lay a single object, a crystal sphere, radiant with an inner light that seemed to pulse with a rhythmic, almost heartbeat-like energy. The sphere was surrounded by delicate engravings that hinted at its importance. Eliza felt a surge of hope. Could this be the Heartstone? Meanwhile, Agnes's journey had reached a critical juncture. She had navigated through the forest's treacherous depths and had finally reached the foot of a towering, jagged mountain. According to the ancient texts, the Heartstone was hidden within a cave at the mountain's peak. The journey up the mountain was fraught with peril, and Agnes knew that the final leg of her quest would be the most challenging. The ascent was grueling. The path was steep and treacherous, and Agnes had to carefully maneuver around loose rocks and narrow ledges. The mountain seemed to resist her progress, with sudden gusts of wind and chilling temperatures adding to the difficulty. Yet she pressed on, driven by the thought of her village and the urgency of her mission. As she climbed, Agnes encountered strange phenomena. The mountain seemed to possess a life of its own, with eerie echoes and shifting shadows that played tricks on her mind. At times it felt as though the mountain was actively trying to thwart her progress, testing her resolve. Eliza, now holding the crystal sphere, felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The forest around her grew darker, and a cold wind swept through the clearing. She realized that her presence had likely triggered a protective mechanism, a last line of defense to keep the Heartstone from falling into the wrong hands. The shadows in the clearing began to coalesce into a more tangible form. They took on shapes of spectral figures, their forms shifting and writhing as if they were struggling to maintain their shape. Eliza felt a deep sense of dread. The forest, which had seemed merely eerie before, now felt actively hostile. Determined not to give in to fear, Eliza clutched the Heartstone tightly and began to retreat from the shrine. Her steps were hurried but deliberate as she navigated the now ominous and hostile forest. The spectral figures seemed to follow her, their haunting presence growing more insistent with every step. Back in Eldenwood, the villagers' desperation reached new heights. They gathered in the village square, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow from weeks of fear and hardship. The once vibrant community had become a place of despair, with hope diminishing by the day. The villagers' isolation from one another only deepened their sense of helplessness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the village, a new and ominous sign appeared. A dense, unnatural fog rolled in from the forest, creeping through the streets and cloaking the village in an impenetrable shroud. The fog seemed to carry a palpable sense of malevolence, and the villagers huddled together in their homes, fearful of what might come next. Agnes, now nearing the cave's entrance, was exhausted but resolute. The cave was dark and foreboding, its entrance partially obscured by a tangle of thorny vines and jagged rocks. She took a deep breath and entered the cave, the air inside feeling cool and damp. As she ventured deeper, the cave's walls glistened with a faint, phosphorescent light. The path was narrow and winding, leading her further into the heart of the mountain. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and Agnes felt a growing presence that seemed to pulse with dark energy. Finally, she reached a large chamber, the Heartstone's location according to the ancient texts. The chamber was dominated by an altar similar to the one Eliza had found, though this one was adorned with even more elaborate carvings and symbols. At the center of the altar lay a pedestal, and on it rested an empty niche where the Heartstone should be. Agnes's heart sank. The Heartstone was missing. Panic began to rise within her, but she quickly suppressed it. She had to find it. The chamber's oppressive silence was suddenly broken by a low, rumbling growl, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the mountain. Eliza's flight from the shrine brought her to the edge of the forest, where the fog had begun to roll in. The fog clung to her, its cold tendrils wrapping around her legs and making every step feel like wading through a thick, suffocating layer of darkness. She could see the village in the distance, its outlines obscured by the fog. In the village, the fog had reached its zenith. The villagers, huddled in their homes, began to hear faint whispers and distant cries, sounds that seemed to emanate from the fog itself. The air was thick with an unspoken terror, and the curse's effects were now manifesting in new, terrifying ways. The fate of Eldenwood now depended on both Agnes and Eliza. The Heartstone's power was crucial, and both women had to overcome the forces arrayed against them to save the village from the curse's relentless grip. As darkness deepened and the fog thickened, the final confrontation with the witch's curse was drawing near. The dense fog that had enveloped Eldenwood seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The village was shrouded in an eerie silence, punctuated only by the distant, mournful howls of the wind. Inside their homes, the villagers huddled together, their fears escalating with each passing moment. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to seep into their very souls, amplifying their sense of dread and helplessness. As the fog continued to roll through the village, it seemed to take on a more tangible, malevolent form. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and strange, disembodied whispers filled the air. The villagers, already on edge from the curse's effects, found themselves gripped by an even deeper terror. The fog was more than just a weather phenomenon, it was an extension of the curse, a physical manifestation of the witch's wrath. In the cave beneath the mountain, Agnes searched desperately for any sign of the Heartstone. The growling sound that had echoed through the chamber grew louder, reverberating off the walls and creating an almost palpable sense of danger. She could feel the cave's oppressive energy intensifying, as if the very walls were closing in on her. Agnes's flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging her into near total darkness. Her heart raced, and she fumbled to relight it. The cold, damp air seemed to grow even colder as the growl became a roar. In the darkness, her breath became visible, misting in front of her face. Her eyes strained to adjust, and she began to see faint, glowing eyes in the dark eyes that seemed to watch her every move. Determined not to be deterred, Agnes pressed on. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old tome, hoping it might provide some clue or guidance. As she flipped through its pages by the dim light of her flashlight, she stumbled upon a reference to the Heartstone's location within the cave. According to the text, the Heartstone was protected by an ancient guardian, a spectral entity bound to protect the artifact from those who sought to misuse its power. Back at the shrine, Eliza's flight from the forest had led her to the outskirts of the village. The fog had followed her, and the village appeared as a ghostly, distorted silhouette in the distance. She could see the panic in the villagers' faces as they peered out from their homes, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. Eliza knew she had to get the Heartstone to Agnes. The Heartstone's light was a beacon of hope, and it was crucial that it be used to counteract the curse. But the fog made travel treacherous, and the village was now a labyrinth of shadow and fear. As she moved through the village, she was keenly aware of the oppressive presence of the curse. In the cave, Agnes's search led her to a hidden chamber, obscured by a veil of darkness. The chamber was filled with ancient symbols and artifacts, and in the center stood a pedestal with a small, glowing crystal. The Heartstone was resting on the pedestal, its light casting an ethereal glow across the room. Agnes approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the Heartstone. As she reached out to take it, the growling sound erupted into a deafening roar. A spectral figure materialized in front of her, a ghostly guardian, its form shifting and flickering like a flame in the wind. The guardian's eyes burned with a fierce light, and it raised a spectral arm, as if to prevent her from taking the Heartstone. Eliza, struggling through the fog, reached the village square where she saw the chaos unfolding. The fog had taken on a more physical form, and dark shapes moved within it. The villagers were now at their wits' end, with the curse's effects reaching their peak. Eliza knew she had to act quickly. She raced towards the village center, hoping to find a way to help her fellow villagers and connect with Agnes. In the cave, Agnes faced the guardian. With no other options, she invoked the ancient incantations from the tome, reciting them with all the strength and conviction she could muster. The guardian's form wavered, as if struggling against the power of the words. The chamber was filled with a blinding light as the Heartstone's glow intensified. The spectral figure let out a final, anguished cry before dissipating into the air. Agnes seized the Heartstone and made her way back to the cave entrance. Her path was fraught with obstacles, but the power of the Heartstone seemed to light her way, pushing back the darkness. Eliza, upon reaching the village square, saw Agnes emerging from the fog. Relief flooded through her as she realized that the Heartstone was in her hands. Together they made their way to the center of the village, where the fog was thickest. The villagers, gathered in a desperate throng, watched with a mix of fear and hope. Agnes and Eliza stood side by side, holding the Heartstone high. As they began the ritual to counteract the curse, the Heartstone's light cut through the fog, dispelling the darkness and casting a warm, golden glow over the village. The oppressive fog began to recede, and the eerie whispers faded away. The villagers, witnessing the dramatic change, felt a wave of relief and hope. The curse's grip on the village began to weaken, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The land, still scarred by the curse's effects, would take time to heal, but the worst had passed. As the dawn broke over Eldenwood, the village slowly returned to life. The Heartstone had restored balance, and the ancient curse was broken. Agnes and Eliza were hailed as heroes, their bravery and determination having saved the village from the witch's vengeful wrath. Though the village faced the challenge of rebuilding, the dark shadow that had loomed over Eldenwood had been lifted. The tale of the witch's curse would be remembered as a chilling reminder of the power of ancient magic and the courage required to confront it.